Thales of Miletus stood on the cliffs overlooking the Aegean Sea, his gaze fixed on the horizon as if he could see the unfolding of centuries yet to come. Though he lived in a time of modest cities and simple lives, his mind reached far beyond the present, contemplating the patterns of human behavior that would echo through history. He understood that wars were not born merely from disputes over land or resources, but from the unchecked pride, ambition, and blindness of men who refused to listen to reason. In his meditations, Thales foresaw nations rising and falling, empires consumed not just by armies, but by their own hubris. Cities he imagined burned, their streets empty, temples in ruins, and families scattered by the relentless tide of violence. Each conflict was not only physical but moral and spiritual, corroding the very essence of societies and leaving behind scars that would last for generations. He warned leaders of the world that ignoring wisdom and succumbing to greed and arrogance would bring destruction, not only to their enemies, but to their own people. Yet even as he contemplated the inevitability of human folly, Thales sensed sparks of hope. He saw individuals acting with compassion, leaders who sought justice rather than domination, and communities striving to preserve knowledge and culture amidst chaos. These small acts of courage, he knew, were the seeds of redemption. For while the machinery of war could devastate the physical world, it was reason, empathy, and reflection that could rebuild it. Thales foresaw that in the distant future, humanity would create weapons capable of annihilating entire cities in moments, and still, the root of destruction would remain the same: the unwillingness of people to think, to reflect, and to choose wisely. He envisioned nations divided by ideology, wealth, and power, yet he also imagined bridges built through understanding, dialogue, and the shared desire to preserve life. The true battlefield, he realized, was not only on the land but within the hearts of men and women everywhere. Even as empires rose and fell, and technology advanced beyond what he could have imagined, Thales continued to warn through the ages. His words, preserved in writings and passed down through generations, were more than prophecy. They were guidance. He understood that wars that destroy nations begin with small choices: the decision to ignore reason, to elevate pride over justice, to let hatred grow unchecked. Yet he also knew that every act of empathy, every attempt at dialogue, every choice guided by wisdom, could turn the tide toward peace. And so Thales of Miletus remained, across time, a silent witness to humanity's triumphs and failures. He observed the rise of societies that embraced reason and compassion, and the fall of those that succumbed to ignorance and cruelty. His message was clear: the greatest enemy is not the foreign army, but the blindness within our own minds. The greatest victory is not conquest, but the conscious choice to pursue justice, peace, and understanding. Through all the centuries, his vision endured. He knew that as long as there were those willing to learn, reflect, and act with wisdom, the wars that would destroy nations could be prevented. And even in the darkest moments, the light of reason would persist, guiding humanity toward a future where the cycle of destruction could finally be broken, and the promise of peace could truly be realized. Thales of Miletus, though centuries removed from the world he once knew, saw humanity repeating the same patterns with a terrifying clarity. He witnessed nations building immense armies and stockpiling weapons capable of annihilating millions in an instant. Yet the wars he foresaw were not only fought with guns and bombs, they were fought in hearts and minds, fueled by fear, hatred, and the refusal to listen. Entire societies became battlegrounds of ideology, propaganda, and pride, while the innocent bore the weight of destruction. And still, amidst the chaos, he saw signs of resistance. Communities that refused to yield to violence, individuals risking everything to protect their neighbors, and leaders who sought to heal rather than dominate. These sparks of humanity reminded Thales that destruction was never absolute. Even in the darkest times, reason and empathy could take root and grow. He understood that the true power to prevent devastation lay not in armies or treaties alone, but in the collective moral choices of people willing to act with wisdom and courage. Thales' mind traveled further into the future, imagining a world connected by knowledge, communication, and shared understanding. He saw that technology, while a potential instrument of annihilation, could also be a tool for peace, education, and cooperation. Yet he warned that the misuse of these tools, guided by greed or fear, could amplify destruction beyond anything the ancients had ever known. The greatest wars, he realized, would be those born of ignorance, arrogance, and the failure to reflect upon the consequences of one's actions. In his vision, nations that chose to heed reason began to rise, not through conquest, but through collaboration. Borders became bridges for dialogue, not walls of division. People learned to value compassion and justice as much as strength, and knowledge was treasured as a weapon against the cycles of violence. Every war avoided, every life saved, became a testament to the enduring power of wisdom, a confirmation that Thales' ancient warnings were not merely philosophical musings, but keys to survival. Yet he remained vigilant. He knew that human nature was fragile, and that darkness could return if vigilance waned. The history of nations was a cycle of creation and destruction, hope and despair. But Thales also knew that awareness could break the cycle. If enough hearts and minds chose reflection over impulse, empathy over anger, and dialogue over conflict, then the prophecies of ruin could be rewritten into stories of resilience, recovery, and peace. And so Thales of Miletus continued, timeless and observant, a silent guardian of wisdom. His message echoed across centuries. Wars destroy nations, but ignorance destroys humanity itself. Peace is fragile, yet attainable through reason, courage, and conscience. Even in the face of immense technological power, the destiny of the world would always hinge on the choices of individuals, the decision to listen, to learn, and to act with justice. Through this, he saw hope. Though destruction may come and nations may fall, the light of wisdom could endure, guiding humanity toward a future where the wars that once seemed inevitable might finally cease, and the promise of life. As centuries unfolded, Thales of Miletus watched with both sorrow and hope as humanity continued its tumultuous path. Yet slowly, imperceptibly at first, change began to take hold. Leaders started listening, not just to advisors, but to the voices of their people and the lessons of history. Citizens, once divided by fear and pride, began to value dialogue over conflict, empathy over vengeance. Knowledge and reason, once ignored or forgotten, became the foundations upon which societies rebuilt themselves. In this envisioned future, the scars of past wars remained as reminders, not as chains. Cities once destroyed rose again, not as monuments to power, but as symbols of resilience and collaboration. People of different nations, cultures, and beliefs learned to see one another not as enemies, but as partners in survival and growth. Education, understanding, and justice became shields stronger than any army, protecting societies from repeating the devastating mistakes of the past. Thales saw that the greatest victories were not achieved on battlefields, but in hearts and minds. The wars that had once seemed inevitable were no longer absolute. They were prevented by awareness, compassion, and wisdom. Humanity had learned, through pain and struggle, that true strength lies in restraint, reflection, and the courage to choose peace even when provoked. And then, in his vision, Thales perceived the world as it could be at its fullest potential, a world where nations thrive not through domination, but through cooperation, where prosperity is measured by the well-being of all, not the power of a few, where the mistakes of the past guide, rather than condemn, the decisions of the future. The light of reason had finally triumphed over the darkness of blind ambition, and the legacy of his warnings endured, not as prophecy, but as instruction, as a gift to humanity. Thales of Miletus, standing once more upon the cliffs of his homeland, felt a quiet satisfaction. He knew that while human nature remained fragile, it also possessed an extraordinary capacity for growth, understanding, and moral courage. The wars that would destroy nations were no longer inevitable. The path to peace was open, illuminated by the choices of those willing to heed wisdom and act with conscience. And so his voice, though silent in the physical world, echoed eternally, that destruction is not fate, that knowledge is power, and that the survival of nations rests in the hands of those who dare to think, to reflect, and to choose wisely. The cycle of war had been broken, not by force, but by the enduring light of human reason, guided always by the vision of a philosopher who saw beyond his time. The story of Thales of Miletus serves as a reminder across ages. while wars may come and empires may fall, the true measure of humanity is not in conquest, but in wisdom, compassion, and the courage to build a world where peace finally prevails. The sun set over the ancient cliffs of Miletus, casting long shadows across the land where Thales once walked. In his vision, the world stretched far beyond his time, a tapestry of both turmoil and hope. Smoke from past wars had faded, replaced by the glow of cities rebuilt not with fear or greed, but with knowledge, compassion, and collaboration. Roads that once divided nations became paths of connection. Rivers that had witnessed battles now reflected the light of shared prosperity. Thales saw the faces of humanity, children learning the lessons of history, leaders guided by wisdom rather than ego, communities standing together against the forces that had once torn them apart. The earth itself seemed to breathe anew, responding to the choices of men and women who had embraced reflection, justice, and courage. Technology, once a harbinger of destruction, was transformed into a tool for healing, education, and preservation. The weapons of war had been replaced by instruments of creation, by innovations that nurtured life rather than ended it. Even the darkest memories of conflict, the pain, the loss, the screams, had not been erased. Instead, they were honored, remembered as warnings etched into the collective consciousness. They were the lessons that ensured history would not repeat itself, that every generation could rise above the shadows of its predecessors. And Thales, witnessing this, understood that wisdom was not only a guide but a shield. It could prevent the rise of cruelty, mend the fractures of society, and light the path toward a world where peace was not fragile, but enduring. In his final vision, Thales saw humanity standing at the dawn of a new era. Nations once enemies now collaborated in pursuit of knowledge and survival. Disputes were resolved through dialogue, not bloodshed. And though he knew the fragility of human nature, the ever-present temptation toward pride and anger, he also knew that those who chose reflection, courage, and empathy could tip the balance forever. The wars that would destroy nations had been averted, not through might, but through the enduring power of reason, conscience, and collective wisdom. And as Thales faded from sight, he left behind an eternal message. Destruction is never absolute, hope is never lost, and the fate of the world rests not on chance, but on the choices of those who dare to think, to act, and to build. The light of human wisdom, once kindled, cannot be extinguished. It travels across centuries, guiding every generation to learn, to reflect, and to choose the path of peace. In that light, nations endure, civilizations flourish, and humanity discovers the truth that Thales had always known, that the greatest victory is the triumph of reason over chaos, of empathy over cruelty, and of wisdom over the blindness that once threatened to destroy the world. Thales of Miletus watched as the world stretched across time like a vast canvas, painted with both calamity and triumph. In his vision, entire continents bore the scars of past wars, cities reduced to rubble, forests turned to ash, rivers poisoned by the relentless march of human conflict. Yet even amid devastation, he saw sparks of resilience, children learning to rebuild not only structures, but trust, communities coming together to heal the wounds inflicted by greed and pride, and leaders who remembered the wisdom of history, guiding their people toward understanding rather than domination. He envisioned the rise of a new generation, one that embraced knowledge as armor and empathy as a weapon. The lessons of countless battles and empires lost were etched into their consciousness, shaping a society capable of preventing destruction before it could even begin. Technology, once a tool of annihilation, became an instrument of creation and preservation. Cities illuminated by innovation glowed as beacons of hope, bridging cultures and nations once divided by fear. Yet Thales knew the shadow of human nature was never fully vanquished. The temptation of power, the seduction of pride, and the lure of revenge lingered in every heart. But he also saw the extraordinary courage of those who resisted these impulses, choosing reflection over impulsiveness, dialogue over hatred, and collaboration over conquest. In this world, the true battles were fought not on battlefields, but in minds and hearts, where every decision carried the weight of nations and the fate of humanity. And then he saw a future where the cycle of war was finally broken. Societies no longer measured greatness by the strength of armies, but by the depth of their wisdom, the compassion of their citizens, and the resilience of their communities. Nations collaborated to solve global crises, hunger, disease, environmental collapse, not through dominance, but through unity. The mistakes of the past became lessons, the memories of destruction became warnings, and humanity finally recognized that its true enemy was ignorance, fear, and unchecked ambition. As Thales faded from the horizon of time, he understood that his warnings had endured far beyond his era. The wars that once threatened to destroy nations had been transformed into stories of redemption, resilience, and hope. And his message traveled through the centuries, that the survival of civilizations depends not on conquest or force, but on reason, empathy, and the courage to act justly. In the final vision, the earth shimmered with life renewed, a testament to the power of human wisdom. People of every nation and culture walked together, guided by the lessons of history and the light of knowledge. And though challenges would always arise, the light of reason and compassion burned brighter than ever, proving that the future need not be written by the destructiveness of war, but by the conscious choice of humanity to create, to protect, and to endure. Thales' voice, silent yet eternal, echoed across the ages. The wars that could destroy nations are not fate, they are warnings. And those who heed wisdom, embrace empathy, and act with conscience can rewrite the course of history, turning prophecy into promise, chaos into peace, and despair into hope. The wind swept across the cliffs of ancient Miletus, carrying with it the whispers of centuries. Thales of Miletus stood, not merely as a man of his time, but as a witness to the eternal struggle of humanity, the struggle between destruction and wisdom, chaos and reason. In his final vision, he saw the culmination of history's trials, a world scarred by conflict yet rising stronger, where the lessons of pain had forged a generation capable of choosing peace over pride, collaboration over conquest, and empathy over hatred. Cities once broken by war now glimmered with life. Streets that had known the echoes of battle rang with laughter and learning. People of every creed, color, and nation worked side by side, understanding that the strength of humanity lies not in domination, but in unity. Technology, once a weapon, had become a bridge, connecting minds, healing bodies, and protecting the fragile planet that sustains them. Even the oceans and forests, once sullied by human negligence, flourished as caretakers learned to live in harmony with nature, honoring the world as a shared inheritance. Thales witnessed the final victory, not of empires, but of reason. He saw leaders guided by conscience, not ambition, citizens emboldened by empathy, not fear. Every decision, every act of understanding, every sacrifice for the greater good reshaped the fate of nations. The wars that had once seemed inevitable were now remembered as echoes, lessons carved into the collective memory of humanity, warnings that ensured history would not repeat itself. In the skies above, the stars shone brighter than ever, reflected in the eyes of those who had learned to listen, to think, and to act wisely. Thales understood that the survival of civilizations was no longer a question of might, but of moral courage, the courage to choose reason over impulse, creation over destruction, and hope over despair. The light of human wisdom, kindled by the choices of countless generations, spread like a beacon across the earth, illuminating a future once thought impossible. And finally, Thales felt a profound peace. His voice, though silent in the mortal world, resonated through time. The wars that would destroy nations are not destiny. They are warnings. Humanity holds the power to break the cycle, to choose understanding over enmity, and to forge a world where peace is not fragile, but enduring. In this vision, the past and future converged, and for the first time across millennia, the world seemed whole. The legacy of Thales of Miletus endured, eternal and unyielding, reason over chaos, empathy over hatred, wisdom over ignorance. And as the sun rose over the renewed earth, casting golden light over mountains, rivers, and cities, it illuminated a simple truth. The greatest victory is the triumph of human conscience, and the brightest hope is the promise of a world finally at peace. And so, Thales of Miletus' vision reached its ultimate truth. The world, once trembling under the weight of endless wars, now stood as a testament to humanity's capacity to learn, to reflect, and to choose wisely. Nations no longer rose and fell solely through conquest. They thrived through understanding. Empires were measured not by the strength of armies, but by the depth of their wisdom, the justice of their laws, and the compassion of their people. Thales saw that the greatest battles had always been within the hearts of men and women, the battle between pride and humility, hatred and empathy, ignorance and reason. And in this final vision, humanity chose reason. Even in the shadows of past destruction, light prevailed. Every choice guided by conscience, every act of empathy, and every moment of reflection rippled across generations, reshaping the destiny of nations. The earth, scarred yet resilient, flourished under the stewardship of a people who had learned the hardest lessons of history. Cities shone with innovation and culture, forests and oceans thrived, and the collective memory of past wars served as a constant reminder that destruction is never inevitable when wisdom and empathy guide the hand of man. And then, in the quiet of the ancient cliffs, Thales smiled. His warnings had endured beyond his lifetime, not as curses of fate, but as keys to salvation. The wars that would destroy nations had been prevented, not through might, but through the enduring light of human reason, choice, and conscience. Humanity had finally understood that the true enemy is ignorance, and the true victory lies in peace. As the sun rose, casting golden light over a world reborn, Thales' message echoed eternally. The future belongs to those who think, who feel, and who act with wisdom. Nations may fall, empires may crumble, but the triumph of reason, empathy, and human conscience will endure forever. And in that enduring light, the prophecy of destruction became instead a story of hope, redemption, and the boundless potential of humanity.